Hey animators, it's time to finish up the walk cycle. What we have left to do are colors and shading. This has been a good 3-part project based on the walk cycle laid out in the Animator survival kit. So let's begin by putting in flat colors. Now that we have our line art complete, we have to select a color palette of colors that work well together. So you can see here in Krita, I am opening up the palette and I have selected my palette, and I'm going to put my flat colors on another layer called flats, and I'm going to put that layer underneath the line art layer. And that's mainly because the paint bucket tool in Krita doesn't always give me the results that I want, and plus later on I want the ability to be able to put in some shadows and highlights without affecting the line art as well. So that's why I'm going to put all of my colors and eventually my shadows and highlights all on separate layers so that I don't ever destroy the original. And you can see kind of my process here is to work through one area at a time, that all the pieces that are going to be in a single color, and I will outline underneath the line art. You can see what happens when we turn the line art off, and I'm underneath the line art, so that way you don't have to be totally precise, you just have to get underneath the line from the line art layer, and that will be good enough because the lines from the line art layer will always cover it up. So I've decided to go for kind of this blue look for the sweatpants and gray and white for the Converse. I've decided to just embrace the idea of the fact that he has cartoon mitten hands by making it so that he's actually wearing mittens. And I'm keeping the sweatshirt, the mittens, and the cuffs and hood of the sweatshirt all in the green tones from the palette. I'm going to use this middle green for the sweatshirt itself, and then a darker green for the pocket cuffs and the arm cuffs and the hood. And I think those go pretty nicely together. You can see once I outline the shape underneath the line art, then I can just use the paint bucket tool to fill in, and then you get really great results. So that's kind of the process. You just outline underneath the lines in whatever color you're using, and then grab the paint bucket tool to fill in. And sometimes it's just easier just to keep staying with the pen itself instead of switching over to the bucket tool. And slowly working our way through all of the shapes. And remember, then what we're going to have to do is basically repeat this process 15 more times, one on each frame. So I'm getting all the color pattern all decided here for this character, all on that first keyframe, and then it's just really a matter of repeating it with all the others. So here we are drawing that last one in, like the last part of the last drawing, getting that piece in there. Figure you didn't need to see me color this drawing in 15 times. I'll spare you that. And there we go. So test it out. Make sure that you got all the pieces. See how it looks. There we go. He's looking good. Now remember, this footage is sped up at about 300%, so the walk cycle is actually a lot slower than that. I think it's just easier for you to follow this tutorial along if it doesn't drag on too much. And so I'm going to duplicate the flats layer, putting it above, calling this layer shadows. I'm going to put the shadows on a separate layer, and I'm going to drag the opacity down to around 30%. And I've also turned on alpha lock. That's the little icon that's almost furthest to the right there. What alpha lock allows me to do is to draw on the layer, but only on pixels that already exist. In other words, it doesn't draw on pixels that are transparent, which is great for doing shadows, and you don't have to worry about coloring outside of the lines. I'm keeping my shading really simple. I'm imagining the sun is directly above, like it's around lunchtime, and I'm just putting in the areas you can see here where I think the shadows would fall. And then once I have that laid in, I'll repeat. And now we're doing the same process with highlights. I'm putting highlights on another layer. Actually, what I'm going to do here first is put in a ground shadow layer as a separate, kind of a separate layer. And I'm just experimenting with some different tools here to see if I can get the look that I want. I'm going to really, really simplify this and just make the shadow on the ground be like a blob. That's kind of been the theme for this whole project. We're keeping the walk cycle really simple. We're not rotating the hips. We're not rotating the torso. We're not bobbing the head up and down the way you would on a more fully polished walk cycle. We just want to keep this one really, really simple. So we're going to do the same thing with the shadows. I think having shadows in there though makes it really, feel like a finished animation. And you can see all I'm doing is I'm copying and pasting over from one keyframe to the next, and I'm really just adding or taking away simple shadows. Notice how I'm not adding separate shadows for the arms on the ground. I'm just kind of making it a blob, keeping it simple, just enough to suggest. Again, we're going with this idea that the sun is directly overhead. So you think about where those shadows would be. Okay, so now we're going to take the flats layer, we're going to duplicate that, call it highlights, and drag it above the shadows layer. We're going to switch over to the color white on the first frame. Just kind of experiment there with the size until you get the look that you want. I'm going to take the opacity down on both the layer and on the tool itself until I get the look that I want. We're really just going to put the barest suggestion of highlights. Notice we're going to have to turn alpha lock on again, just like I did just there. And now let's think about, we would get highlights on the top of the head, anything that's getting more direct sunlight than other parts of the body. So the parts of the arm that are facing up, and maybe on the legs. I went back and forth whether or not, a simple drawing like this should have it, but ultimately I think I decided to go with some shadows on the leg parts that are more in direct sunlight and the top of the hoodie. And then it's just a matter of going to each frame and repeating. Keep it simple. Give yourself just a few rules, top of the head, top of the hood, top of the arms, top of the legs, and don't bother with, more than that. That's enough for this exercise, just to make it look good and have fun. And then when you've repeated that process for all of your drawings, you can sit back and enjoy your work. Okay. It's been a good 3 installment project where we created a walk cycle based on the reference images from Richard Williams's Animator Survival Kit. We've added in some colors, added in some simple shading and highlights. And I would say that is a job well done. If you got this far, you should really be proud of yourself. Nice work. We'll see you in the next project.